Kiss guitarist Ace Frehley has died. He was 74 years old.
They should have been here with us 50 or 55 years later and enjoying the fruits of their labor, but sadly they're not.
When the shocking news of Ace Frehley's death broke, it sent a wave of grief through the rock world. Fans of Kiss, the band that changed rock and roll forever, were devastated, but no one's reaction carried more weight than that of Gene Simmons. For decades, Gene and Ace had one of the most complicated relationships in rock history, marked by brilliance, conflict, and deep emotional scars. They were brothers in music, but strangers in life. Their partnership both legendary and tragic. In the aftermath of Ace's passing, Gene Simmons did something few expected. He broke his silence and finally admitted the truth fans had long suspected about Kiss, that behind the makeup, pyrotechnics, and fame, the band's unity had crumbled long ago. What began as a dream of four kids taking over the world had turned into decades of tension, ego battles, and lost friendships. For years, Gene had kept his distance from Ace, often criticizing his struggles and lifestyle choices. Yet when the news came, Gene's tone shifted. He spoke not as the confident businessman or the demon of Kiss, but as a man mourning a friend he never fully understood until it was too late. His confession was raw and heartbreaking, a reflection on what Kiss truly was behind the masks, not just a band, but a fragile family torn apart by fame. In this story, we uncover Gene Simmons' final words about Ace Frehley, the regrets, the secrets, and the truth behind the band that defined a generation. Because sometimes, even rock legends can't escape the heartbreak of what might have been. In the early 1970s, when rock was loud, raw, and unapologetic, four ambitious dreamers from New York City decided to take it one step further. Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, and Ace Frehley weren't just building a band, they were crafting an empire. Together they created Kiss, a group that would forever change the face of rock and roll. Their goal was simple but audacious, to give fans the loudest, wildest show on earth. And they did just that. From the start, Gene and Ace formed a unique bond. Gene, the disciplined perfectionist and marketing mastermind, admired Ace's effortless talent. Ace wasn't a talker. His guitar did the speaking. His riffs, drenched in distortion and attitude, became the backbone of Kiss's signature sound. Songs like Shock Me and Cold Gin turned him into a fan favorite, and his space-age persona, the Spaceman, made him a legend. Together, Gene and Ace represented two sides of rock's dual spirit, structure and chaos, control and freedom. But even as Kiss exploded into superstardom, cracks began to show. The very traits that made Gene and Ace great together, their differences, also made them combustible. Gene was a workaholic obsessed with perfection and image, while Ace lived for spontaneity and rebellion. Gene believed in running Kiss like a business. Ace saw it as a brotherhood built on music and fun. Those opposing visions would eventually drive them apart. During the band's meteoric rise in the mid-70s, their success seemed unstoppable. They sold out arenas across the world, set guitars ablaze on stage, and became larger than life. Behind the scenes, however, Ace struggled with the relentless pressure. Fame came with a price. One paid in exhaustion, substance abuse, and growing resentment toward Gene's tight control. Ace felt like the soul of Kiss was slipping away, replaced by contracts, deals, and merchandising. Gene, on the other hand, couldn't understand why Ace refused to take things seriously. To Gene, Kiss was more than music. It was a brand, a legacy. To Ace, it was supposed to be fun. Their clashing philosophies sparked countless arguments. Gene saw Ace as unreliable. Ace saw Gene as cold and domineering. What had started as a partnership between two rock visionaries slowly turned into an unspoken rivalry. Despite the turmoil, their chemistry on stage never faltered. When the lights went down and the crowd roared, Gene and Ace transformed into their alter egos, the demon and the spaceman, two mythic figures locked in a dance of fire and thunder. The audience never saw the distance growing between them, hidden beneath the layers of makeup and armor. By the late 1970s, Kiss was not only the biggest rock band in the world, but also a pop culture phenomenon. Toys, comics, lunchboxes, Gene had turned their fame into a multi-million-dollar empire. Yet with every business success, Ace felt more disconnected. "I just wanted to play rock and roll," he later said. "It wasn't supposed to be about money or control." For Gene, Ace's attitude was infuriating. For Ace, Gene's obsession with perfection felt suffocating. Still, deep down there was respect, and even love. They had started as brothers chasing the same dream, but success had reshaped that dream into something neither could fully control. Their bond would never be the same again, and as the 1980s approached, that tension would push Ace Frehley to make a decision that would alter the course of Kiss forever. By 1982, the tension inside Kiss had reached its breaking point. Years of touring, internal conflict, and creative disagreements had finally taken their toll. The band that once moved as a single unstoppable force was now divided by egos and exhaustion. At the center of that storm stood Ace Frehley, the band's wild heart, the man whose electrifying solos had helped define their sound, and the one who was now quietly slipping away. For Ace, the magic was gone. What had once been four brothers chasing a dream had turned into a corporate machine. He felt suffocated by the endless meetings, contracts, and Gene Simmons' iron grip on the band's direction. To Ace, Kiss was no longer about music. It was about business. He had never been good with politics, and now, every rehearsal and recording session felt like a battle for survival. Behind closed doors, Ace's struggles with addiction were worsening. The pressures of fame, combined with his growing resentment toward Gene and Paul Stanley, pushed him deeper into self-destruction. He showed up late, missed sessions, and clashed constantly with management. But underneath the chaos was a man in pain, one who felt betrayed by the very family he helped build. Gene, for his part, grew increasingly frustrated. He couldn't understand Ace's self-destructive behavior, interpreting it as laziness or lack of commitment. What he failed to see was that Ace's rebellion wasn't against the band. It was against the system that had turned their brotherhood into a brand. The two men who had once shared laughter, dreams, and stages were now barely speaking. The final straw came during the recording of music from The Elder and Creatures of the Night, albums that marked a period of confusion for the band. Ace hated the direction the music was taking. He wanted raw, hard-hitting rock, not the polished, theatrical sound Gene was pushing. Tensions boiled over during meetings, with Ace often storming out in frustration. Then, in 1982, he did what fans never thought he would. Ace Frehley quit Kiss. The announcement shocked the rock world. To many fans, Ace was the soul of Kiss. His departure marked the end of an era, a fracture that would never fully heal. Gene's public response was professional, but behind the scenes it hit him hard. Despite their constant fighting, he respected Ace's talent deeply. He knew that without Ace, Kiss would never be quite the same. In later interviews, Gene admitted that losing Ace felt like watching a brother walk out of your life. But true to form, he buried his emotions behind a wall of business focus and ambition. The band moved on, recruiting new members and reinventing itself for the next generation. But Gene would later confess that deep down, he always felt something was missing. Meanwhile, Ace launched his solo career. Free from the constraints of Kiss, he rediscovered the joy of playing music for himself. His 1987 album, Frehley's Comet, was a success, proving that he could shine without the makeup and brand of his old band. But fame is a double-edged sword. And for Ace, the demons he carried didn't disappear just because he left Kiss. His battles with addiction continued, and his life became a cycle of brief comebacks followed by setbacks. Through it all, Gene and Ace's relationship remained complicated. They exchanged occasional words through the press, some kind, others sharp. Gene would criticize Ace's choices, while Ace would accuse Gene of arrogance and greed. But beneath the bitterness, there was always a lingering sense of unfinished business, a connection that neither time nor distance could completely erase. Fans hoped for reconciliation, and at moments it seemed possible. The two reunited for tours, photo ops, and brief performances, but the bond that once burned bright had faded to embers. Still, Gene never stopped acknowledging Ace's role in the band's legacy. Even when they clashed, he knew that Kiss would never have become Kiss without Ace Frehley. And years later, when tragedy finally struck and Ace was gone, that truth would hit Gene Simmons harder than any critic ever could. In the years following his departure from Kiss, Ace Frehley's life became a story of extremes, incredible highs followed by devastating lows. He was still loved by millions of fans, yet haunted by the same demons that had once driven him away from the band. For every triumphant return to the stage, there was another fall from grace. And while the world continued to see him as the spaceman, the man beneath the makeup was fighting a battle he could never quite win. By the 2000s, Ace had made several attempts to get sober and rebuild his career. There were flashes of brilliance, reunion tours with Kiss, solo albums, and heartfelt interviews that showed glimpses of the humble, funny, and gentle man behind the wild reputation. But those who knew him best could see the cracks. Fame, once his escape, had become his burden. He struggled with loneliness, addiction, and the relentless pressure of living up to his own legend. Gene Simmons, meanwhile, continued steering Kiss as a global brand. The band played sold-out tours, sold merchandise by the millions, and remained one of the most recognized names in rock. But every time Gene saw an old photo or heard an early Kiss riff on the radio, he was reminded of what had been lost. Despite their fights, Ace's creative spark had been irreplaceable. Gene knew it, though he rarely admitted it publicly. Behind his confident exterior, Gene carried something he rarely showed the world: guilt. He had often spoken harshly about Ace in interviews, calling him unreliable or self-destructive. But deep down, Gene knew that Ace had been more than a bandmate. He had been a brother. They had built their dreams side by side, shared hotel rooms when they were broke, and celebrated when the impossible happened. And now, as the years passed and Ace's health began to decline, Gene started realizing that time was running out to make things right. When news broke of Ace Frehley's death, it hit Gene harder than he expected. For a moment, the world's most confident rock star fell silent. The man who had always seemed untouchable was suddenly human, fragile, grieving, and full of regret. In a public statement days later, Gene's tone was strikingly different from his usual bravado. He didn't talk about Kiss as a business or brand. He spoke about Ace as a person. The man who could make a guitar sing like no one else, the friend who made him laugh until his stomach hurt, the brother who had once shared his dream. Ace was one of a kind, Gene said softly. He was wild, funny, and brilliant, and sometimes broken. We fought, sure, but we also created magic together. Kiss wouldn't have existed without him. It was a moment of raw honesty from a man known for his walls of confidence. Fans could feel that Gene's words came from the heart, not from a press release, but from pain. For the first time, he acknowledged what many fans had long suspected, that behind the makeup and the money, Kiss had always been a family, and losing Ace meant losing a part of that family forever. Privately, those close to Gene said he struggled for months after Ace's passing. He spent time reflecting on their early days, two young dreamers with guitars trying to conquer the world. He realized that while Kiss had become a legend, its true essence had always been in those early, hungry years, when it was just about the music, the friendship, and the belief that they could be something special. Ace's death forced Gene to confront something he had avoided for decades: the cost of ambition. He had gained the world, but somewhere along the way, he had lost a brother. In the quiet moments after the tours and interviews ended, Gene often found himself replaying old recordings of Ace's solos, the electrifying bends, the wild phrasing, the sound of pure, unfiltered joy. And in those notes, Gene found both comfort and sorrow, because no matter how much time passed, that sound, Ace's sound, would always echo in his heart. In the months after Ace Frehley's passing, Gene Simmons began to open up in a way fans had never seen before. For decades, he had been the ultimate symbol of confidence, the business-minded frontman who always had control. But now, in interviews and quiet public appearances, the armor began to crack. Beneath the trademark sunglasses and sharp tongue was a man who had lost more than a bandmate. He had lost a piece of his own history. At a tribute event for Ace, Gene took the stage in front of an emotional crowd. He stood quietly for a moment, then spoke words that silenced everyone in the room. For years, I thought Kiss was about success, about being the biggest band, selling the most records, creating an empire. But when Ace died, I realized I was wrong. Kiss was never about money or fame. It was about four guys who loved music, and each other, even when we didn't know how to show it. It was an admission few ever expected from Gene Simmons. For the first time, he acknowledged that behind all the business deals, there had been real human connection, messy, painful, but real. He confessed that he had pushed Ace too hard, trying to control him instead of understanding him. Ace wasn't built for rules, he said. He lived by feel, pure heart and instinct. And that's what made him brilliant. I wish I had told him that more often. After the tribute, Gene retreated from the spotlight for a while. Friends said he spent hours revisiting old photos, demos, and interviews, trying to make sense of it all. In one interview months later, he admitted that success had come with a price. "We built something huge," he said. "But in doing that, I lost people I loved. Ace was one of them. If I could go back, I'd trade a lot of the fame just to jam with him one more time. No cameras, no contracts, just music." His words struck a chord with fans around the world. For so long, Kiss had been about spectacle, the flames, the makeup, the noise. But Gene's confession revealed something deeper. It reminded everyone that behind the masks were four flawed, passionate men who had built something beautiful together and paid dearly for it. Paul Stanley, who also shared a complicated history with Ace, later said that Gene's honesty was healing not just for fans, but for the band itself. "Gene's not someone who shows emotion easily," Paul admitted. But Ace's death broke something open in him. It made him human in a way we hadn't seen before. In later interviews, Gene began to redefine his legacy. He spoke less about the money and empire of Kiss and more about the people who made it possible. "We were brothers," he said. "We fought, we laughed, we lived on the edge. And Ace was the spark. He made us believe we could fly." That realization seemed to bring Gene peace. For the first time in years, he stopped talking about retirement or tours. He started talking about gratitude, about how lucky he was to have shared his life with people who shaped him, even through conflict. He even began visiting fans' tributes to Ace, laying flowers quietly and standing in reflection before walking away without a word. Gene Simmons will always be remembered as the demon, the man who breathed fire, wore armor, and conquered rock. But to those who listened closely after Ace Frehley's death, another side emerged. The friend who finally understood the cost of greatness. In one of his last interviews about Ace, Gene summed it up simply. "When you spend half your life wearing makeup, you forget what's real." Ace reminded me. He was real. And that's why we loved him. With those words, Gene Simmons didn't just honor his fallen friend. He gave fans something deeper than music, something more honest than fame. He gave them the truth. And that truth was this. Kiss wasn't built on money or image or even sound. It was built on love, imperfect, chaotic, but unforgettable. And in the echo of Ace's final notes, Gene finally found what he had been missing all along. Peace.